Hey, my name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort. Going to be a busy show. We'll react to Georgia being at number 4 in the college football playoff top 25 that came out on Tuesday night. We will talk to Mike Griffith about getting ready for the Dogs and the Aggies on Saturday. Also, pretty nice compliment from one of the SEC network analysts in regards to Georgia. So we'll kind of fit it in here as Georgia takes care of a big SEC opponent on Saturday. We're still pushing for that great atmosphere to honor a great group of UGA seniors and some juniors possibly also playing their final home game. So it is going to be a very busy day, and really glad to have you with us as DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Harrah's Cherokee Resort. Find us online at Caesars.com/Harrah's-Cherokee.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
All right, coming up later on in today's show, and it's really just a couple of minutes from right now, I'm going to play some audio that we typically would not play in a situation like this. I'm going to play a little audio of New England Patriots quarterback Tom Brady. Now, you may say, well, Brady's got nothing to do with Georgia, and he doesn't. However, there was something that Brady said coming off a win for the Patriots on Sunday that I thought, oh my gosh, that's a perfect statement about the current state of affairs for UGA as well. And like I said, it's kind of an unlikely source, but coming up in a couple of minutes, I think you'll see where I'm going with this. Brady on his own offense, how that relates to UGA. We'll get to that here in a moment on DawgNation Daily, presented by Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort. Before that, though, let me begin with a compliment. And it's a pretty big, bold compliment for UGA. And the reason I want to share it with you right now is not just because it's kind of interesting to hear an SEC network analyst saying good things about Georgia, but how much what the analyst Marcus Spears says, how much it kind of flies in direct contrast to so much of what you're hearing in other corners of the TV world, the internet world, when it comes to Georgia right now. On the show, which is Thinking Out Loud, which is a show that Spears does with another analyst, Greg McElroy, he had some very nice things to say about Georgia as captured by 24/7 Sports. Here's what Spears says: that Georgia is the toughest team to play in the conference. I know people's eyebrows are going to raise like, oh my gosh, don't you see LSU putting up 50 points against Georgia? Well, Georgia's the toughest team to play in the SEC, Marcus Spears says, because of the quality of ball they can play. Now, they've had their moments this season where Jake Fromm's not been great, and people look at him throwing for 100 yards. Georgia, he says, this is Marcus Spears, literally is going in the game saying, we're going to impose our will on you and see if you can sustain it for 4 quarters. This was the best front seven they're going to probably play all year, and Derek Brown was unstoppable. He's referencing the Auburn game this past Saturday. And Marcus Spears says, you know what Georgia said? We're still going to hand it off. We're still giving our running backs an opportunity. We're still going to rush for 100 yards. That's the SEC network analyst Marcus Spears touting Georgia as the toughest team to play in the SEC, as captured by 24/7 Sports. Now, the fact that Spears is an LSU graduate, and it was seen on one of those ESPN shows last week, being very proud of LSU post-Alabama, the fact that he's now saying this about Georgia, I think kind of makes it even more interesting. And I know that for a certain pocket of Georgia fans, this will kind of come across as a little bit of hollow praise because they are more worried about the lack of the consistent week-to-week passing game and even really lack of consistent down-to-down passing game than they are impressed right now with Georgia imposing its will against Auburn. I thought Auburn was a great win for UGA, even though UGA didn't necessarily play great throughout the full game. I guess I kind of find myself more in agreement than not with Spears, but for a certain pocket of Georgia fans, they kind of want a little bit more than what Georgia brought to the table against Auburn. And even if that's not my point of view currently, I at least kind of understand where it's coming from. But you can't discount the notion and the way in which that Spears describes the situation, that Georgia is one of those, as Kirby Smart has said it before, kind of stubborn run-first teams. And in the SEC, that mentality probably helps. And the fact that Georgia, even against an elite defense, especially elite front seven, the fact that Georgia still maintained its intent to go out there and run the football in that situation, I think that does kind of say something about the will of Georgia and its desire to impose that will on other teams. And, you know, listen, the rest of the way, either because of the venue where the game's going to be played, not in a hostile stadium, or against a defense likely not quite as good as Auburn's, it gets a little easier for Georgia the rest of the way. And the good news about that is that might open the door for Georgia to do, even in the running game, a little bit more than it did against Auburn. Maybe getting some more explosive runs. Kirby Smart said this past week that, or I should say this week, he has said that he felt like against Auburn they were actually maybe a little closer to getting some of that than some people realize. But as Marcus Spears points out, against a good front seven, it's just kind of hard to do. Here's what Kirby said about it.
There's several runs the other day that were close. They were good runs. They just weren't super explosive where we got to the second level. Some of that's the back end. Some of that's you don't create the angles when all the extra guys are in the box. You contribute to a lot of things. I contributed to good defense. When I think of Auburn and you turn on that tape, they run to the ball, they hit, they tackle. They got really good, a lot better than people even thought, corners. And they're physical up front. So got a good football team, and so does Missouri, guys. I mean, you start looking at it, they got good football teams in our conference, and I mean, look at us defensively. You're not giving up a lot of explosive runs either. So across the board, it's tough to do that, and we're certainly looking, reaching, trying to find ways to create those advantageous situations. But I just know our conference is very defensive when it comes to rankings and statistics. There's a lot of good teams in it.
Let me kind of wrap all this up this way. I totally get there's a degree of skepticism among some Georgia fans with the current state of the Georgia offense. We're going to get more into that coming up in just a moment here. But from Marcus Spears, especially given the fact he is an LSU grad and certainly proud of what LSU is doing this season, what he said on the SEC network this week for me is not hollow praise. Not the best team necessarily, not the biggest challenge, but the toughest team to play. I think toughest, that word that Spears uses, kind of rings true there. I don't think that's hollow praise at all. I think that's the brand that Georgia's established itself as you head towards this college football playoff race. And of all those teams kind of competing for those top four spots and eventually to be the national champion, I don't know that anyone embodies toughness right now more so than Georgia does. Georgia's not perfect. There are some things as far as the overall profile that it doesn't have, but toughness it does have, and good for Marcus Spears for kind of pointing that out. All right, let me kind of shift gears and mention something else here for a moment. As I mentioned before, the College Football Playoff Top 25 came out again last night. I made my case on yesterday's show for Georgia being number 3 ahead of Clemson. I also predicted that the committee wouldn't do that, but that's the right thing to do. Georgia now has 3 teams in the top 15, which it has beaten. That's a pretty good resume Georgia's putting together, but the Dogs did remain 4th last night. I guess the good news is they didn't move down, although no one expected that they would. The bad news is, based on the commentary of the ESPN guys on the set, and based on the committee chairman, Rob Mullins, there was never any really serious consideration of reshuffling the top 4. So this idea that it's a new ranking every week and that they start from scratch every single week, at least based on the way this was talked about last night, that was not indeed the case. And for the most part, the 3 teams ahead of Georgia were kind of rubber stamped back there in that spot once again. But nonetheless, being 4 right now is not such a bad place to be. It means that if Georgia wins out, it is obviously going to be in the college football playoff when it's all said and done. As far as how Rob Mullins says the committee evaluated UGA coming into this week, Mike Griffith's got a piece up that at DawgNation.com. You can read about that. What Mullins says about Georgia is there was a lot of discussion for teams 4 through 6. That's Georgia and that's Alabama, and then you kind of get into the Oregon, Utah stuff a little bit of after that. He says that Georgia added to their resume with an impressive win at Auburn. So obviously touting Georgia for the resume-building win against Auburn, but not necessarily doing too much in the evaluation process of that overall. And listen, obviously the seeding in this matters to me, that if Georgia makes the playoff, there's a much bigger advantage to being in Atlanta for the Peach Bowl, which you probably have to be the number 1 seed to do, more so than being out in Arizona, which no one's turning down a spot in the playoff, but that's obviously a bigger travel challenge than getting a chance to play a game in your home state. But for right now, the committee's not really evaluating, it would seem, on the basis of that kind of stuff. But this is one of those things where, listen, it's better to be in the playoff discussion, especially solidly in the mix with the way that Georgia is right now, than it is not to be. And for Georgia, they kind of find themselves back in the spot again, once again, kind of the 3rd straight year that Georgia has been right here on the cusp of being in the college football playoff and hope to return there for the first time since 2017. The mental part of how Kirby Smart handles all of this, I also thought that was interesting this week in terms of what his message is to his team. Obviously he's told us over and over again that he tries not to pay attention to that kind of stuff, but he acknowledges the fact that the players themselves are going to notice the conversation that's being had around them. Here is Kirby on how his players handle the playoff race.
They're going to see it. They're going to hear it. What you try to emphasize is the facts. Here are the facts. If we block and tackle people, we're pretty good. You know what I mean? If we block and tackle people, if we do simple better, we're pretty good. If we don't, and we turn the ball over and we don't play well on special teams and we give up big explosive plays, we're not very good. So what's going to allow me to do those things? None of the other stuff matters. None of it matters. So, if you get their focus on playing better and getting better, especially the second part of your roster, because we got twos that are having to play now. And so now this week, more twos are going to have to play. The next week, maybe more twos are going to play because you got more guys getting injured. So how do I get the rest of my roster better is really all we focus on.
So let me see if I can wrap all of this up here as a part of our program here today. It sounds like what Kirby Smart said there, that they've got a pretty good mental approach about how they're taking this on, the race to the college football playoffs. And there's no doubt Georgia's presence in this debate right now, Georgia's presence in this discussion is fueled by what Marcus Spears spoke about, the toughness that Georgia brings to the table. That's not just a physical toughness, it's a mental toughness as well, knowing that every game the rest of the way for Georgia is likely must win, including Texas A&M this Saturday. And the good news is, based on what we've already seen from Georgia in big games thus far this season, I don't think this UGA team's going to shy away from that challenge, not against LSU or Texas A&M or anything else in between. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort. It's great to have you with us on video, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, radio, on 960 The Ref in Athens, or in a podcast form, pretty much wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. Just really glad to have you with us today and really appreciate Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort for bringing it all to you. Two great locations for them. I'm talking about the original Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort and Harrah's Cherokee Valley River. Wonderful gaming facilities at both these places. Also fantastic, well-appointed hotel rooms, including at Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort. They've got over 1,100 rooms. This is a giant resort facility. 10 dining options, spa, everything else to make it kind of a world-class getaway for you. That's what Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort provides. And pretty soon, they're also going to provide something brand new. The opening of the book, that's right, sports gaming is coming to Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resorts by the end of this year. Fantastic facility to kind of get in there, kind of a man cave, sort of sports basement type thing where you can watch the games and get action down on the games. If you're watching on video, you see the address on your screen for this. If you're listening radio podcast, just do me a favor, search this. Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort, the book, sports book. And when you search that, you're going to find that and see everything that's going on there and be ready to go for sports gaming coming to the Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resorts here very soon. Great to have them as a part of the program here today. It's Mike Griffith later on. Before that, though, let's go around the doghouse. It's brought to you today by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And I told you before, I want to play for you in just a moment a little bit of audio of Tom Brady. And Brady, the Patriots quarterback, is not typically a name we would mention here on DawgNation Daily, just given the fact that he's an NFL guy and we talk college football. But to me, this is appropriate because, listen, there continues to be this debate going on nationally among the media, and you can cite all kinds of examples of that on social media or on television, whatever else. But even within the kind of boundaries of DawgNation, Georgia fans themselves, does Georgia have enough offense to win a national championship? And even when it comes to a great win against Auburn, was there enough offense in this game to actually make you feel good about Georgia going forward the rest of the way? And heavens knows, here in our program, we've kind of had our turn on this, and I've been skeptical, but kind of turned the page over the last couple of weeks of saying, hey, let's just let this play out. Let's just kind of find out if Kirby's philosophy and the way that the talent that Georgia currently has is being deployed. Let's just kind of find out by watching the games if it's truly going to be good enough. Now, as you might imagine, the subject of offense, the presence of it, the lack of it, did come up with Kirby Smart again this week. And as a way of kind of sort of beginning this conversation, let you hear a little bit of Kirby Smart on the subject.
Each guy on our offense is, I guarantee they're giving the best they can. They've had great practices. We go against them good on good. I see them make good plays. It just hasn't come to fruition in a game, at least not against Auburn as often as we'd like. We had good drives, and I thought that our offensive staff did a really good job. The 3 touchdowns we had were all plays that they came up with and designed and had for Auburn. They weren't every game plays. They were plays that were meant to help us against Auburn, and they did.
So listen, I think if you're a Georgia fan, there's a certain degree of, what do you do with this? Do you celebrate the touchdowns that Georgia scored at the expense of not being too worried about the 3s and out that Georgia collected by the seemingly handful? on Saturday? Or do you worry so much about those offensive miscues and those drives that never quite got started that you miss the fact that Georgia kind of got a pretty impressive win against a very good defense on Saturday? I think it's difficult to kind of wrestle with that about what the right approach for a fan is in terms of where Georgia is, knowing that it's about to try to compete for national championship against some teams that are really scoring a lot. And this is where Tom Brady comes in, because on Sunday, the Patriots won against the Eagles, but it was not a good offensive performance. Was it 17-10? Was that the final score Saturday? 17-10 for the Patriots against the Eagles. And Brady was talking about that post game, and it's going to be hard for you to hear the question, but the questioner says, hey, are you worried about your offense right now? And what Brady says in response to that, I believe, is exactly how Georgia fans should feel, but the current state of affairs for their favorite team as well. So here's Tom Brady on his team, but relevant for Georgia as well. Take a listen to this.
Up and down. That's what it looks like to me. So, yeah, we'd probably do everything better.
Are you concerned about the offense, or do you feel like it's something that's going to work its way out?
I don't think it matters what I think. It matters what we do.
I mean, isn't that perfect? Are you concerned about your offense right now? What do you think about it? Brady, the consummate veteran, says, doesn't matter what I think. It simply matters what we do. And I believe for Georgia, it's the exact same thing. Hey, do you think Georgia's got enough offense to match wits with Jimbo Fisher on Saturday? Doesn't matter what I think. It simply matters what Georgia does. Hey, do you think that Georgia in the SEC championship game, given the fact that LSU is scoring like 50 points a game, does Georgia have enough offense for that game? Doesn't matter what I think. It simply matters what Georgia does. We are all about to go on a ride. And we're going to find out one thing or the other. We're going to find out that Georgia's defense is so good that these high-powered offenses don't look quite the same on the same field against UGA because of how tough the UGA defense is. We also may find out against somewhat lesser defenses, which for the most part Georgia will play the rest of the way, that all of a sudden the offense suddenly looks better. However, there's a pocket of Georgia fans that says, I don't think that's going to be true. I think this sputtering offense we've seen in some other games, I think that's going to show up when it matters most, and I think it's going to keep Georgia from winning the SEC championship or anything else like that. You may be right, but for now, it doesn't matter what you think, whether you think it's good enough or whether you think it's a problem or you think you don't even know. Right now, it doesn't matter what any of us thinks. It just simply matters what Georgia does. So from now on, we'll just simply be judging these results. Saturday against Texas A&M and everything beyond that. I think Tom Brady, even though he was speaking about his own team, I think that message is pretty relevant for Georgia all the way around. It's Around the Doghouse. It's presented by our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And solution is the word that matters there in that name, because when it comes to a cracked foundation or water coming into your house somewhere, especially your basement or your crawl space, that's a problem. And when you have a problem, you want a solution, and Engineered Solutions of Georgia can provide sometimes simple solutions to these kinds of things. And if that's the case, then ESOG is going to tell you exactly how to fix it. But let's face it, when it comes to foundation issues for something as valuable of an asset as your house is, sometimes those issues are more complicated to fix. When that's the case, it's another reason to trust ESOG, because Engineered Solutions of Georgia has 2 full-time engineers on staff. That's why we trust them. They also offer a fully transferable triple protection warranty, which is on materials, installation, and design. So here's the number to dial. Dial 678-ESOG now. That's 678-ESOG now. Dial that number. Get in touch with Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And, of course, it's great to have them as a part of Around the Doghouse. It's also great to have you with us here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort. I'll have more from Kirby Smart later on in the program, but for now, on the look back at Auburn, look ahead at Texas A&M, and a little bit of a preview of the SEC Championship as well. Let's talk to Mike Griffith here. DawgNation Daily, presented by Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
We'll say hello to Mike Griffith. Good stuff from him last night on DawgNation.com, recapping the playoff race and Georgia back at number 4 again. You know, Mike, I enjoyed your piece last night, quote from Rob Mullins, and I made my case yesterday that I think from a resume standpoint, you could arguably put Georgia at number 3 right now, ahead of Clemson, just based on the fact that the ACC for a second consecutive week only had one team ranked in the top 25. It was obviously the Tigers. Certainly seems like, based on the commentary from the ESPN folks and, frankly, Mullins and the selection committee itself, they didn't pay any serious attention to moving anybody around within the top 4, which I guess is their prerogative for the moment. What did you make of the deliberations? What did you make of where Georgia was, and kind of after adding another resume win, how it's keeping pace with the national elite for the moment?
the old question, do you judge the team on the wins or the losses? And I guess it comes down to what you want for college football. And, I can't really blame Clemson because, they do play two SEC teams. This year they played A&M, and they've got their annual game with South Carolina. So it's not like Clemson's not scheduling decent teams out of conference. But the league, it's so down, in fact, there's a real quandary. I don't know, I talked about it last night. I'm sure you probably touched on it. I mean, the Orange Bowl, if Clemson's in the playoff, who are they going to have? They're contracted to take an ACC team. There's nobody ranked. So that's, good luck on Virginia. Virginia Tech with 4 losses. I don't know. So I thought the rankings were fair. And the thing they did that I liked, and I'll give them credit for, is they didn't drop Alabama yet. And now I'll admit I did in my poll, but they didn't just assume that Alabama's not going to be as good without Tua. They said, you know what, it was still a convincing win, and we're going to evaluate them based on that game. Now, the next game Alabama plays Western Carolina. I don't know how much of a standard that is to judge a team by, but certainly when Alabama plays Auburn, we'll find out if they're deserving of their number 5 ranking. I happen to think that a one-loss Pac-12 team would probably pass by Alabama in the rankings, and should Georgia lose either to Texas A&M or LSU, I suppose, then I would think that one-loss Pac-12 team could be the 4th team instead of a one-loss Alabama.
Yeah, that's kind of my take on this, too, is that I think last night, I'm going to talk more about this later on in the program, but I think last night Alabama got a lot of attention because there wasn't a lot else going on. In other words, you had to have some drama for the TV show, so discussing Alabama's presence in these rankings was a way of kind of creating some debate and some mystery, where otherwise things, for the most part, were kind of paint by numbers. I do think that the way that ESPN discussed this last night, at least from my opinion, and obviously I'm wrong all the time, but to my opinion, the way that Alabama was discussed last night was misleading. I think the TV folks last night, maybe even Rob Mullins himself, would have you believe that Alabama is still very much alive as a number 5 team, and that if Georgia were to win the SEC, it might open the door for Alabama to make it in as a second SEC team. The truth is, I've given you my opinion on this before. I believe that the committee wants college football to be a national sport, which means you need all 5 of your Power 5 conferences to be included in the discussion and have that be the case. I believe if there is a reasonable choice out of the Pac-12, whether it be Oregon or Utah, I believe they'll take it. Now, it's a tougher argument if it's Oregon, just because Oregon lost to Auburn, and at least, a handful of SEC teams are going to be able to say the opposite of that. But nonetheless, that's what I believe the committee is going to do here, because this is a relevant discussion for UGA fans, by the way, because while Georgia loves the idea of winning the SEC and getting back the college football playoff, there would at least be some curiosity to that if a Georgia win also ushered the chance for a 2017 redo where Alabama once again makes the playoff as a non-SEC champion. So, the Alabama storyline is at least somewhat relevant for UGA because these two things would seemingly be pretty intertwined at the moment.
Yeah. I hesitate to draw on precedent with this committee, BA, because of what happened last year and the way Georgia was left out. And it wasn't the 4 best. It turned out to be the 4 most deserving, with Oklahoma winning their league. But this committee has already shown us this year that they're willing to overlook head-to-head. I mean, they moved Penn State back ahead to Minnesota, and they both have 1 loss because they said that Penn State has a better resume. So while you may have that transitive property there with Auburn, and we're trying to discuss a 1-loss Oregon versus a 1-loss Bama, they would make the argument quickly that Oregon had a better overall resume. Because I, like you, think the committee wants to see, more conferences involved, and that's what let's just say it, that's what the TV people want, and they have all the money, and that's why we have a system like this, so it can be manipulated for television matchups. So if you want to know what's going to happen, then follow the dollar and follow the TV ratings, because that's going to tell you who's going to make the playoff and what the matchups will be.
Hey, I've got more questions from Mike Griffith here coming up. Before that, I got something really, really exciting to tell you about. The legendary former UGA coach and athletic director Vince Dooley, the guy who's had Dooley Field named after him here this year, he's going to be doing a book signing tour at some upcoming Kroger locations around the metro Atlanta area. So let me kind of give you the dates here. This is a great way to get ready for the holidays. How about an autographed book from Vince Dooley for that special someone in your life? I've had a chance to talk to Coach Dooley about some of the books that he's written, and his passion for these subjects is tremendous. tremendous. So here are a couple of the dates to kind of keep in mind here. It's Wednesday, November the 27th. That's the kickoff event. It's going to be at the Kroger in Gainesville, 1931 Jesse Jewell Parkway in Gainesville from 4 to 6 p.m. Then it's going to be Rome after that, Marietta, Dalton, Dallas, Macon, Buford, Bonaire, Cumming, and Woodstock. So a whole bunch of locations for you to chance to see Coach Dooley, get a book signed as a great holiday gift, or frankly just for yourself. So that begins Wednesday, November 27th from 4 to 6 p.m. there at the Kroger on Jesse Jewell Parkway in Gainesville, my hometown, by the way. We'll have more details for you on this at DawgNation.com, but just be aware that over the course of the holiday season to come, big-time book signing about to go down with the legendary former coach of the Georgia Bulldogs, Vince Dooley. Mike, let's turn our attention here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort, to the Texas A&M game on Saturday. Boy, it's been pretty clear that Kirby Smart's tried to deliver a narrative on this, starting with his post-game press conference on Saturday. We're focused on A&M. We're focused on A&M. Anytime he was asked about postseason stuff, winning the SEC East, he kind of pivoted back towards the Aggies on Saturday. That's obviously continued with his press conferences the last couple of weeks here. He's couple of days here, I should say. He's pretty focused on Texas A&M, and for me, that's easy to understand. You look at A&M overall, this is a team that's only lost games to other kind of national championship-type contenders or top-ranked teams. I think A&M is pretty dangerous here, in other words, and I think this is a game that Georgia's got to be really careful of. What's your early impression of Texas A&M as Georgia gets ready to play them on Saturday?
Yeah, they've won 4 in a row, and look, we know this. Teams change. Teams. I'm always amazed at people. Well, you said back in February, a lot's happened in February to Georgia. You said a month ago, a lot has happened. Players get injured. I mean, Georgia without Ben Cleveland and Cade Mays and Lawrence Cager is a different Georgia team. They are. They absolutely are. Look at the difference between South Carolina when Georgia played them and the South Carolina team that Texas A&M played, that had just lost to Florida and Tennessee. So much of it is when you catch teams and how they're playing. And right now, Texas A&M's got momentum, and they feel good about themselves. It's a young team that's grown up and grown into the scheme with the $75 million coach. There's a reason Jimbo's there. He's the biggest shark in the Shark Tank. And, he's a guy that knows what Kirby Smart wants to do. They come from the same school and philosophy of thought. He knows what Kirby's going to do before Kirby does it. We saw Will Muschamp know exactly what Kirby was going to. These guys, they think alike, and it's because they come from a similar background. Think about it. When you think about your friends from your hometown as you get older, and you go, man, we really get along. Well, yeah, no kidding. You grew up in the same world, and you have the same perspectives. And from a football standpoint, I think that's very true with Jimbo and his staff. Jimbo's doing some things a little different, BA, with this pro set offense, and Kirby said last night it's almost like a wishbone when you consider how the quarterback can run the ball. So there's some challenging principles here and some tricks, that the Georgia defense is going to have to stay responsible with. They've been very good, very thorough to this point. They've only given up one play longer than 30 yards since the second quarter of the South Carolina game. That's a lot of football. So 17 quarters or something. So the Georgia defense has done a great job. But A&M brings momentum. They bring a challenging scheme. They bring an experienced coach. And Georgia right now is absolutely limping to the finish line. The injuries are mounting. 5 of their last 6 games came against teams that have had byes, which are more rested teams and more prepared teams. So this is a game of survival. If your team ends up with more points than A&M on the scoreboard, don't complain. Just survive this game and get to that awful, wretched Georgia Tech program. You just got to survive this one, and then all you got to do is show up the last week in Atlanta, and you'll beat Georgia Tech. They'll roll over and die before kickoff.
Well, I definitely agree with you on to the tune of this not being a beauty contest type game. It's just a game to win and move on from. And I think that beating Texas A&M presents certainly its own challenge there in that regard. With that in mind, Mike, the issue with the Georgia offense continues to be kind of a hot topic. What's more significant to you? The fact that Georgia found an explosive play on Saturday, converted a couple trips in the red zone, including really a nice drive to close at the first half, or the fact that Georgia went 3 and out by my count, 9 times on Saturday? I believe that's the overall number. Which of those two storylines is more significant for you at the moment?
Yeah, and they were outgained 158-2 in the fourth quarter as well. The fact that Coley was able to show some twists. That power I formation, they scored twice out of that, once on the pass to Harrah, on the other one, I believe, and then the other time they got down there, they had Eli Wolf, off of play action. I like that he was able to come up with some concepts and cash in on the red zone. Very important that they scored touchdowns and not field goals there. Very important. And so that shows you. I mean, it's not like James Coley doesn't understand offense. It's not like he can't draw up plays, but there are certain parameters that the head coach puts on him. You got to understand a lot of this is Kirby Smart, and I said this earlier. A lot of people automatically put a negative connotation to conservative, but conservative is also smart. And there's no pun intended there, but conservative is what's kept Jake Fromm healthy while all these other quarterbacks are falling by the wayside. Georgia's not worried about building a lead once they're up 35-7 and running the score up and running a guy around and exposing him to hits. They're running the football up the middle so the other team can't blitz their quarterback, so they can neutralize the pass rush, so they don't put their quarterback in position to get hit. Because Kirby Smart understands you got to have your quarterback standing at the end of the year to have a legit shot at winning a championship. You got to get to the finish line. Like I said, it's like NASCAR, like racing at Talladega. You got to survive those first 190 laps. You got to be there for the finish, and that's what Georgia's trying to do. They're trying to be there for the finish. So they've done a great job protecting Jake Fromm. When they get the lead, they know they've got a good defense, so they haven't turned the ball over since the South Carolina game. I mean, that's pretty amazing, and a lot of that is because of the conservative nature of the play calls. So, you can't have one without the other. You can say, oh, man, boy, Alabama scored all those points. Well, they did. But would you rather have Alabama's resume and roster right now or Georgia's? I think you would probably take Georgia's, BA, because they've got a quarterback that's still healthy, right? So Kirby's managed this team in a way that for a third straight year, Georgia's 9-1 in college football playoff contention. He's made history, matching Steve Spurrier with 3 straight SEC East crowns. So the critics that are out there, if they've got a resume that can match that, I'll gladly listen and consider that maybe they could do it better than Kirby Smart. But in my opinion, I think he has gone with the schemes that fit his talent and more importantly, fit his injury situation. So you asked me for A or B, and I'm going to give you C and tell you that the storyline is who's healthy enough to play on Saturday.
Well, along those lines, can we stipulate this? You offer kind of a stark comparison between the current state of Georgia, the current state of Alabama, and I will admit that I've said on this show before that I believe that Alabama has swung too far in the direction of kind of a finesse-y brand of offense. They don't run the football as well as they used to, and they don't play defense as well as they used to. I think the commitment to the offensive side, the passing game for Alabama has actually hurt the overall, I think, tone and tenor of the program. However, I do think there is a middle ground between what Alabama has become and what Georgia currently is. And I want to kind of, I guess sort of step up and say that no one is saying, hey, the rest of the way, Georgia needs to become way more like Alabama. I think what the average fan would say is Georgia just needs to find a little bit more offense. Sure. This has never been about 180 degrees the other direction. This has always been about take what it is you do well, run the football, play defense, sprinkle on a little more in addition to that, and Georgia very well could be a national champion. But if it's just what Georgia is now, there's a fear among some fans that's just not going to come true. So it's never been a stark choice between 180 degrees one way or the way that Georgia currently is. It's about just adding a little bit more to what Georgia currently brings to the table.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and I think we saw that at Florida. I thought Florida was probably the best balance of offense and defense, and to this point, I would still say that's Georgia's best game of the season. I think so. I think they were even better against Florida than they were against Notre Dame. I thought I kind of petered out against Notre Dame there at the end. But I thought the Florida game, they finished well. Obviously, Kirby made the decision on a 3rd and 7 to throw it and convert a first down, and we saw the offense. But you know what? But this is where I get back to who's healthy, because it was Lawrence Cager. And the Georgia offense is different when they got a guy out there that can get open and catch the ball. Imagine that. When you got a guy that can get open and catch the ball, what does it do for your offense? The problem is the other guys can't. The other guys can't. But you can look, I looked at the slow motion and I found this guy on the other side. Well, look, let's be realistic here. Can Jake Fromm at least have his primary target open 75% of the time? Because what Jake's not going to do, what he's not going to do is he's not going to turn the ball over. He's not going to force it. We saw that act before. We saw that at South Carolina, right? Can't go broke taking a profit. Well, if your profit can't catch the ball and it goes off his hands into a defensive back's hands, you just went broke. Or if your profit is Matt Landers and he turned you a long way in a route after 3 years, you just went broke again. Or if your profit doesn't come back for a football, and the DB steps in front of him, and then he's a freshman, and you went broke again. So you don't blame Jake Fromm for not forcing it, BA. That's my thought. I'm not saying you are. I'm not saying you are. I'm speaking figuratively. Don't blame Jake Fromm and say, oh, you got to trust your receivers. No, you don't. No, you don't. There's a few on this team you absolutely shouldn't trust. And we saw that against South Carolina. Now, when Lawrence Cage is out there, I think the Georgia offense is fine and dandy. And I think if Lawrence is healthy, then Georgia will have plenty of offense to beat A&M and quite possibly LSU too.
Hey, Mike, thanks for being on the program. We'll look forward to reading a bunch more from you at DawgNation.com in the days to come. And, of course, as I said before, it's great to have you here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort.
Great. Thanks, BA.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
All right, so let's transition now. Let's take a cruise around the SEC, courtesy of our friends of Royal Caribbean, as we do our SEC Through. And, by the way, speaking of Royal Caribbean, beautiful new amplified ship Oasis of the Seas, where you take a ship that many of you may have been on before, but you have not been on it like it is now. It's about to re-debut here this month, and it is, I mean, you want to talk about new and improved. This amplification process has been amazing, whether it be adding the Ultimate Abyss, which is the tallest water slide at sea. If you're watching a video, you got a chance to see that right now. That just seems amazing. Seems like so much fun. Boy, your kids would love that. Also, great things for the adults and really everybody else as well, including the Playmaker Sports Bar and Arcade, Music Hall, the Lime and Coconut, kind of some of those live music bar-type venues that really make it all fun. Bionic Bar, which is a robotic-type bar service thing. This is actually almost like a Star Wars thing. It's really pretty amazing. It's all there in the all-new amplified Oasis of the Seas. You can find out more by going to RoyalCaribbean.com. I love to just kill time at the website, but it's also a great place to go to get in touch with a travel advisor and book your vacation, because I know you need one. It's RoyalCaribbean.com as we're cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean right now. Mike mentioned Alabama a moment ago. I'll kind of follow up on some of that myself. I think that the ESPN needed something to talk about on television, and so the last night Alabama became a hot topic during the playoff debate. But at number 5 right now, the way that Kirk Herbstreit described Alabama, I thought was pretty appropriate. They're kind of a placeholder. You don't really have anyone to put at 5. You might as well put Alabama, because you're not going to vouch too much for Oregon or Utah yet, because one of those two teams hasn't beaten the other. And the fact that Oregon did lose neutral site to Auburn is a little bit of an anchor on its progress right now. Both these teams are on the road on Saturday. They're in Arizona. It is Utah, Arizona, and it's Oregon, Arizona State, I believe. I believe I've got the right matchups there on that. And so that'll be a chance for them to kind of prove themselves a bit more. But eventually, if those two teams keep winning, and the winner of the Pac-12, the one that beats the other, I think they're just going to move ahead of Alabama. And like the one thing that you hear talked about with Alabama a lot is, well, Alabama's got one more chance to send a message. With Mac Jones at quarterback going into Jordan-Hare Stadium and really hanging a number on Auburn, kind of citing the example of what Ohio State did in the 2014 Big Ten title game, things like that. Here's my opinion, and if I'm wrong about this, I'll take my medicine when it happens. But here's my clear opinion. Alabama is not good enough to blow out Auburn. They're just not. The last time that Alabama was in Jordan-Hare Stadium back in 2017, they lost the game. So Alabama's first charge against Auburn is to make sure you win. This idea that you're going to be, able to, with a backup quarterback, coast in there, hang such an impressive score that you send a message to the committee, I don't think this Alabama team is good enough to do that. Now, I do expect them to beat Auburn with Mac Jones at quarterback. I probably do. But the idea that Alabama is going to just absolutely blow out Auburn, which would essentially put Gus Malzahn on the unemployment line, just given some of the rumblings kind of around the plains right now, I just don't think that – I don't believe that level of play is available to this Alabama team right now. I don't. So that's my take on that if it takes a blowout in Jordan-Hare for Alabama to be back as an at-large team in the playoff discussion, I don't think it's going to happen. By the way, speaking of teams in the SEC West, and this is like the most Georgia story ever. So Michael Divinity, who's one of the better linebackers as part of LSU, really good pass rusher, left the team. What Orgeron is calling personal reasons, did not play against Alabama. Now, LSU still won the game, but miraculously, those personal issues that Divinity was dealing with, and I'm not making light of it because I have no idea what they are, but from a Georgia fan standpoint, I guess I am making light of the fact that he's back. He'll be, I guess, going through practice right now. We'll see how much he plays coming up pretty soon, but certainly the eye is towards having him ready and, being a factor in the SEC championship game against Georgia. It's also fair to point out that LSU actually hasn't clinched the West yet. they'll have the formality of playing Arkansas on Saturday as a 40-plus point favorite, or as Reese Davis said on ESPN last night, a 9 million point favorite over Arkansas. But LSU does need that one to clinch the West. But it looks like they're getting Michael Divinity back here, which is a pretty big addition. Couple South Carolina stories, one good, one not so good. Marshawn Lloyd, the running back, the Gamecock commit, who we've talked about a lot on our program before, at DeMatha Catholic, a high school there in Maryland, which does not allow kind of first semester, senior year graduation, things like that. Marshawn Lloyd has announced that he's actually leaving DeMatha, the school where he played at, as a way of trying to graduate early so that he can get into South Carolina a little earlier. So kind of an interesting development here. Lloyd is one of those big-time recruits that South Carolina would not be getting if it didn't have Will Muschamp at coach. And I know it sounds like I'm sort of vouching and defending Muschamp. I guess in this regard I am. Muschamp is a pretty good recruiter. And with everything being kind of a mess the way that it is at South Carolina right now, it's important to note that a lot of folks wanted Lloyd in South Carolina, kind of quietly swoop in there and got him, and now they may even get him as an early enrollee as well, I guess. So kind of interesting news there involving Lloyd. But the bad side of all this is, remember yesterday we talked about the South Carolina president saying to a media outlet in the Palmetto State that South Carolina Athletic Director Ray Tanner had discussed with Florida State how they managed the buyout for Willie Taggart, which most people took as a way of saying, hey, maybe we could do the same thing and buy out Will Muschamp. The university president said he did not have that conversation, or at least he said that that Tanner did not have the conversation with the Florida State. Well, the news site, I believe it's SC News Now, I believe that's the name of the website, they have released the audio recording of the South Carolina president speaking on this same subject. The quote on the audio perfectly matches up the quote as they ran it. So what is it the kids like to say online about saving receipts? Apparently this news outlet saved their receipts, and all of a sudden this situation at South Carolina looks pretty messy. Not so much in terms of Will Muschamp's future, but the fact that the key power players here, university president, athletic director, maybe even football coach, they're not on the same page. This is not a good look for South Carolina. And, frankly, I've made my case before that one way or another, continuity with Muschamp actually probably makes the most sense, just given the tough challenge of the schedule that Carolina's played this year and having to battle Clemson in state, Georgia at a time when it's better than it's been, and to say nothing of the fact that Muschamp actually won that game this year. So for now, we'll make that cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And I want to let you hear from Kirby Smart here on the subject of Texas A&M on Saturday. And listen, I am a firm believer that this is a tough game. The point spread was higher than I expected to be. It was 13, 14 points, depending on when you've seen it this week. I thought the line might be a little lower than that. I just think that A&M's a pretty good team, and one of the things that makes A&M good is its quarterback, Kellen Mond. And when Smart spoke about Mond on Monday, I thought the way that he described the situation with Mond was actually pretty interesting. And if you're a long-time kind of student observer of college football, you know that his coach, Jimbo Fisher, has been doing this kind of stuff for a long time. Here is Kirby on Kellen Mond and the impact that Jimbo Fisher has had on him.
He has probably improved as much as a player from high school to now as any quarterback I've ever seen. I liken it to when Dak first went to Mississippi State and Dan took him and did all these really good things with him. Jimbo has really, this kid has a tremendous arm talent. We know the athlete he is. We know he can run, but that's not, it's not like you say, well, this guy's a runner first. He's a really good passer. And the beauty of it is he plays in a pro-style offense and throws to some really good weapons and checks things, moves things around, but is extremely athletic. And when I say athletic, I don't mean like, oh, he's going to scramble for a first down. I mean, when he takes off running, he continues running. And there's guys out there that just can't catch him. And he doesn't always look to do that, but when he does, it's extremely dangerous. So it makes you play him a different kind of way. So we've got a tough charge in front of us.
So let me say it this way. Jimbo Fisher has worked with a lot of college quarterbacks that have ended up being first-round picks. Now, I have no idea what Kellen Mond's future in that regard is. But you think about, you're going to laugh at some of these names, but it's the Jamarcus Russells of the world when he was offensive coordinator at LSU. It's E.J. Manuel and Jameis Winston. I guess Christian Ponder, have to add him into that discussion there as well as an offensive coordinator. This is a guy that's worked with a lot of quarterbacks that eventually became first-round picks. You say, well, none of those guys were good in the NFL. Winston's a starter. The rest of them, for the most part, kind of bust. Honestly, I don't think that matters. Jimbo kind of got them there and handed the baton off to the NFL, and what they did after that was kind of their own business. But there's no doubt that he has been a very successful QB tutor, and frankly, I think that's one of the most underrated aspects of him and his coaching pedigree. I've kind of joked with my audience about this before because we take comments and Twitter things, and I hear from people a lot. I apparently think Jimbo Fisher's a lot better coach than a lot of people who listen to the show on a regular basis do. And I think that Jimbo's impact on Kellen Mond, one of the reasons why I think this is a tough game for Georgia on Saturday. A game that I expect Georgia to win, but it is unique for Georgia to be playing a ranked team that's not Auburn this late in the season. We're just not kind of used to seeing that. I think that's one of the reasons why Kirby has kind of talked up the game as much as he has. Let people know of, hey, don't be, having visions of the SEC championship dancing around in your head. We got a big one to play on Saturday. Mond, the quarterback that Smart just mentioned, one of the reasons why it's a big game, and it's also one of the reasons why we're challenging Georgia fans to make it a great atmosphere, not just to honor the seniors who are playing their last game, the juniors who might be playing their last game, but because we think that it needs a big atmosphere to beat up on Texas A&M. So that whole hashtag best for last, your best for their last, we need a good atmosphere on Saturday at Sanford Stadium so that Georgia can do what it needs to do against Texas A&M. By the way, real quick, if you're watching on video, you see the hover helmet on my desk. This is an amazing holiday gift item. It's a helmet that kind of floats suspended in midair. It spins around. It's the perfect addition to your office, to your man cave, your basement, whatever else you got. And it's a great holiday gift for that special person in your life, as well as our fight song music kind of gets cranked up here. It is a unbelievable option there for that. So go to the website. It is hoverhelmets.com /DawgNation. You can use the promo code DawgNation. That's hoverhelmets.com /DawgNation. You can use the promo code DawgNation. Also, a real easy way to do this as well. You go to the website, DawgNation.com, and you can see that for yourself there today. It's at at DawgNation.com. You can find that for yourself, or hoverhelmets.com /DawgNation. When you use the promo code DawgNation, you'll get 20% off your order. All right, so we'll wrap up here today. A couple things to say before we go. First of all, basketball tonight. Pretty fun game for Georgia against Georgia Tech. This is going to be a nice showing there at Stegman Coliseum. My understanding is there is a ton of NBA scouts expected to be in the building. I guess the first time for Anthony Edwards against kind of a living, breathing, real opponent. So a good chance to see that tonight. Georgia versus Georgia Tech, how the Ant-Man does in the in-state rivalry against Georgia Tech. That's going to be a lot of fun. Of course, plenty of DawgNation.com coverage of that. We'll talk about it a little bit more tomorrow on our program there as well. Something else we like talking about here for us is the Gator Hater Updater. It has now been 1,117 days since Florida's beaten Georgia. That's really good news, something we enjoy celebrating here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort. Y'all have a great day. Look forward to seeing you back here tomorrow, and we'll talk to you then. And on video, time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down as we get ready to take your comments here. And, of course, I'll remind you that the R.S. Andrews Go with the Flow comes up on Friday. But for now, your chance to kind of weigh in on any of the subject matter for today: air, heating, plumbing, electric. R.S. Andrews does all those things for us. They can do all those things for you. You can find them online at rsandrews.com, especially that $99 furnace safety check to make sure your heating system's ready to go for the winter to come. That's a good idea right now to make sure we do that. Vernon Luzier says, what's the count with Eddie? Yeah, we're at 1,117 days. Eddie's loving that right now. Loving that. Michael Lawson says, shocked to see that Eddie hasn't apologized yet. Eddie doesn't apologize very easy. He doesn't necessarily do that. Kenesha Clark on the subject of a watch party. Yeah, Kenesha, I'm sorry about that. That's not a DawgNation thing. That is a Facebook thing all the way around. So I apologize for that. Philip Jordan Wells says Eddie apologizes to no one. Yeah, that's certainly true. He does not. Hayes Calloway says, can't wait to see the Dogs play in the SEC championship game. Yeah, I'm starting to get excited about that myself. Starting to get really excited about that. Drew Odom, the subject of the new desk piece. Yeah, this is our hover helmet. Hoverhelmets.com /DawgNation. Use the promo code DawgNation. Get 20% off. You can also go to DawgNation.com and see some of that for yourself there. Matt Rugavina says when he's at home and not being a world traveler that he lives right in the heart of Aggieland in Houston, Texas. Let's remind those guys who plays the tough brand of football. I actually think that's a really big storyline for A&M under Jimbo Fisher. I kind of made the case before that I think that Fisher's actually a pretty good coach. I think one of the things that has been a challenge for him taking over the Texas A&M program in a way that it kind of wasn't for Kirby Smart when he took over the Georgia program. I think that A&M still has some of that Big 12 DNA just kind of baked into the cake, to mix metaphors. And I think there's a real culture lacking in toughness under the previous coach, Kevin Sumlin. It's not a surprise that Sumlin's next job was farther west as opposed to coming back east, because the farther you get west, the less, the less toughness I think that you see. I don't think that Sumlin's a tough football coach. I don't think he ran a tough program at Texas A&M. And I think that Jimbo Fisher is actually really kind of cut from very much the same kind of cloth that Kirby Smart's cut from. He wants physicality and toughness as part of his program. And you see, when A&M has lost this year, they haven't been able to run the football. I think Mike Elko's a really good defensive coordinator, but maybe they've had some defensive lapses. I think that establishing that toughness at a program that just didn't have that very much, I think it takes time. I think that's what's taking Jimbo Fisher time. But for the most part, A&M is beating the teams it's supposed to beat, just not necessarily getting that big marquee signature win. So I still think of Jimbo as one of the top coaches in the SEC, and I think that he's building Texas A&M into something that's going to be hanging around there for a while. A threat to the top of the SEC West in future years? I would say probably so. But I do think, as Matt pointed out, that in a game like Georgia, what you expect to be the difference is just the overall level of physicality that Georgia brings to the table. And that's been a hard thing for Jimbo to establish at Texas A&M. I think the long-standing track record of that being absent in College Station is a big reason why. It sounds like Connor Riley's joining us.
Did you just call Pac-12 football soft?
I think from a physicality standpoint, I think it's less soft than the SEC is.
I mean, because LSU looks real physical right now. Alabama looks real physical.
Yeah, we're obviously talking about more than a one-year run here. Marcus Jackson says, I'm nervous about this game, and I think that a little bit of anxiety is probably appropriate. It's not a game I expect Georgia to lose, but it is, as I said before, I think part of the angst about a game like this is the fact that it's just a little bit unusual. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but go back and try to find the last time Georgia played a ranked opponent this late in the season that was in Auburn. We've seen late November, games against Auburn before they had a lot of high stakes, but this is just a little bit of an unusual game. Now, I guess by the CFP committee standpoint, A&M's not ranked, but this is a top 25 caliber team that I would say. It's just a little bit unusual to be playing this team this late, and I think the overwhelming consensus is that Georgia needs to keep winning to keep its playoff berth alive. So Georgia's playing for a lot in this game, even though it's not a clincher game like Auburn was or an SEC championship game like LSU would be. When it comes to the standing amongst the playoff committee, the A&M game also provides a lot kind of on the table for Georgia here. So I think that's kind of where some of this angst kind of comes in from, and I think that's probably fair to bring up. Mike Zano on the subject of DJ Daniel. And, Mike, I'm going to tell you right now, I think you're wrong about that. I think critical of Daniel on the heels of what he's been doing lately, I just think it's flat wrong. I thought he made a big-time play on a pretty deep route from Anthony Schwartz, who's a very difficult guy to cover on Saturday. Initially beat off the line of scrimmage, possibly so. Stepping back in to make a big play on that. I think that Daniel deserves a bunch of credit for that. And the fact that Georgia has had to play as much of this season as it has without Tyson Campbell, a former five-star that started a lot of games for you a year ago, the fact that Georgia in its secondary has missed him and yet not missed him, so to speak, weathered that storm for the most part. I think that speaks really well of the veteran presence of your safeties and what Eric Stokes has been doing, but also the fact that DJ Daniel has kind of stepped into that role and earned that spot. And by the way, in doing so, he has had to hold off some pretty impressive guys. Veteran like Tyreek McGee, freshman like Tyreek Stevenson, who's now playing more in a kind of a different role. I think that DJ Daniel is one of the success stories for Georgia this season. Like a lot of these freshmen who are second half of the year just playing with a lot more confidence. Now, he's obviously a redshirt freshman because he's a junior college transfer.
Sophomore.
But I got no beef with DJ Daniel whatsoever. No beef with him whatsoever.
Daniel had a better game on Saturday than Eric Stokes did. I don't think there's much debate there. I thought Daniel played exceptional on Saturday. And he is someone who, sure, he's had some shaky moments at times, but he is someone who has gotten better. And this is sort of the underbelly where injuries can actually end up being a good thing, because now you feel pretty comfortable about having three corners you can trust in the outside in Daniel, Campbell, and Stokes.
Ronnie Harris, I'll get your comment in just a moment here. But before that, let me also say this. I had somebody from A&M reach out to me yesterday, and he was like, hey, if you're going to pick three guys to kind of profile for Georgia, for Aggies fans who maybe don't know the team all that well, who would you pick? And I've said this before, that this defense is so different than previous Georgia defenses that had like that one really big star. You could say that about Roquan in 2017. You may even say that about DeAndre Baker, the Thorpe Award winner from last year. This is just not a team led by stars. And I gave him 3 names, and I guess we could debate the 3 names that I gave him. But nonetheless, what I really wanted to say is the real story of the Georgia defense for me right now, and what your audience ought to know about the matchup with Georgia, is the way in which all these young guys right now are heavily contributing to depth. You know, what Nolan Smith has been doing, what Trayvon Walker is doing more of now, but really been kind of a solid player, for, especially on third down for Georgia for most of the season. The fact that Nakobe Dean is trusted to play as much as he is right now. To say nothing of, Daniel, what Tyreek Stevenson is starting to become. That what makes the Georgia defense to me great right now, the veteran presence of the starters probably so, but the fact that kind of next group includes so many really impressive young guys who in different situations would maybe be starting and playing a whole lot more. Walker on the field a bunch more, if not for Malik Herring. Tyreek Stevens on the field a whole lot more, if not for Eric Stokes. You could start pointing out a lot of these guys who are not on the field every snap because of some sort of faulty level of play with themselves, but kind of, just a factor of just how deep this defense is right now. That for me, if you're really highlighting something of the Georgia defense for people who don't know it, it's the young depth that I think makes this a really, really dangerous defense. And when Georgia starts employing those guys in creative ways, which they've been doing as of late, I think it makes the Georgia defense even tougher to deal with.
Who were the 3 players that you gave?
All right, you can debate this. I gave Azeez Ojulari, Tyler Clark, and Richard LeCounte.
No love for J.R. Reed.
I don't know. I mean, obviously I considered Reed. I considered Jordan Davis. I considered even, I guess, kind of Nolan Smith a little bit too. I considered a number of guys, but I chose Clark because I think his story is interesting. The fact that, he's kind of showing the promise that he once displayed in the Rose Bowl. I mentioned LeCounte because J.R. Reed's been a given now for a while, but I believe that LeCounte has raised his level of play, which makes him an interesting story. And I do believe that Azeez Ojulari continues to be about the most consistent performer week to week for me for the Georgia defense. Honestly, I didn't feel great necessarily with the 3 names that I chose, but I had a reason for choosing the 3 that I did. And so if you had to do your 3 names to know for an A&M fan, which 3 would you have given?
Azeez, LeCounte, and Reed.
Okay.
Not that Tyler Clark isn't good. He's had an exceptional season. I just think for the way this Georgia defense type wants to play, the essential bend, don't break, not give up big plays, the safeties are a crucial element to that, and I think Reed and LeCounte have been outstanding this year, both in pass support and in run support.
Ronnie Vernon Harris on that subject says, what's your realistic thoughts on how many defensive guys return next year? I mean, I do think there's a chance that LeCounte's kind of playing his way into the draft right now. I think there's a fair chance that that's going to go on with him. I think that we're kind of in a modern age now when guys consider the draft, not just at Georgia but other places, they're sort of looking for reasons not to go to the draft more so than they're looking for an opportunity to go to the draft. I just think they lean in the direction of saying yes to the draft and then saying no if they have a strongly compelling reason not to. So I would say there's a chance you brace yourself for that at least just a bit. At least just a bit. What else is going on over here? Let me go to YouTube for a second. All right, over here on YouTube. Bruce Farmer says, I love the Dogs' defense, but how hard is it to stop? He says, how hard is it to stop slant teams, the slant pass that you saw again from Auburn on Saturday? It's frustrating watching this, and sad the Dogs can't do it themselves because of the limited repertoire. So we'll deal with both those issues because I know Smart addressed the slant thing yesterday. Let me start with the slants on offense. That there's really no such thing as just shutting everything out all the time. That you have to, I mean, you saw Auburn get a couple slant plays off on Saturday, but for the most part, you also saw really quick tackles immediately after that happened. I mean, that just kind of went down. That I know some people think it's bend but don't break when a team moves the football at all, but teams are going to get something on you from time to time, and Georgia's obviously trying not to get beat for big plays, which is going to make a slant sometimes a little bit more of an option to throw. So I wasn't that stressed out about the slant stuff that worked on Saturday because for the most part, Georgia was making, pretty effective tackles after the catch was made, and those Auburn drives were eventually stalling out. So the presence of Auburn slants on Saturday weren't that big of a deal. The same thing with the Tennessee thing, even though some of those actually went for big plays. Teams are just going to get something on you from time to time. You just got to make sure you get plenty on them, both negative defensive disruptions and also big plays for your own offense. As far as what Kirby said yesterday, and we'll probably get into this more during the week, I just didn't have the energy to do it today. I just couldn't do it. I just am so.
Is it your new the ball was wet sort of argument?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what to say about Kirby's explanation. I don't have the audio to play for you. I apologize. So let's see if we can just kind of recap this. Connor, you were there.
I have the quote pulled up.
All right, yeah, read the quote, and then we'll kind of do this a little bit.
We've been a slant team in the past. The first couple of years here, we ran a lot of slants. If you can remember, we ran slants in the spring game. One of the passes that Eric Stokes took from J.J. Holloman went for a pick six. That doesn't mean it's a bad play. It doesn't make it one way or another. But it is one that we haven't been extremely successful with. We've actually run slants this year. We just haven't thrown them. There's several times we've been in empty that we've had slants attached. But number one, you've got to get guys who can win on slants. Number two, you've got to feel good about the coverage you're getting before slants. Some of what we're doing, and we don't want to give a slant away as opposed to giving a fade away, that has to do with leverage.
All right, so I have a number of problems with this. Let me see if I can just kind of roll through them here pretty quickly. Y'all know I'm not very good at math, but I do read a lot of like nerdy stat geek type blogs, especially associated with the NFL. And what anybody who kind of follows the math NFL will tell you is the lowest percentage of throw you can make is a fade route, right? Which is the exact opposite of a slant. That's the lowest percentage throw you can make, and virtually anything else is a lot more efficient. Slant routes are generally thought to be of just regular receiver routes, about the most efficient throw you can make. So the idea that somehow fade type routes are better than slant type routes, numerically, that's just objectively false. I mean, that's just cut and dry, objectively false. Now, defensive coaches will tell you that the only reason why the slants are as effective as they are is because you have to be worried about the fade. So that's kind of a long-standing football debate. You can kind of Google that and kind of dive into that and sort of figure out what side you want to be on. So that's my first issue, is the fact that slants, just by the people who judge this stuff, will tell you it's a very efficient play to typically run for the obvious reasons. However, my bigger issue is kind of this, and like I said, I didn't have the energy to do this on the show today. I don't even want to do it now, but if it's going to come up, honesty compels me to admit, I don't like the blaming of the player stuff. I don't like it when, to be honest with you, I don't like when Mike Griffith does it. I don't like when Kirby Smart does it. I don't like any of that kind of stuff. If you are the coach, your job is to design a play that works. And if the offense is not working, you can't leave it to, well, what do you want from me? These wide receivers can't get open. I'm sorry, that is not a usable excuse, even if it's true. And in some cases, let's face it, it may very well be true. But even if that's true, that is not a usable excuse. It is your job to design something that works. Do not tell me about the birth pains. Just show me the baby. And that's kind of my thing with the whole discussion of why Georgia doesn't run slant patterns.
So, but he is telling you the reason we don't run slants is because, and slants are traditionally, they are used to beat man coverage. And this Georgia team all season has shown that they struggle to get open against man coverage plays. So that sort of leads me to my larger point that for this offense, slants aren't exactly a given thing just because they don't have guys who can get open in man coverage on their own.
Then I would say run a pick play, run a rub route, run something along those lines. It's the reason why I don't have the energy to do this, because there's just no good answer to this. And honestly, we've seen from Kirby, and y'all know how much I love Kirby, but we've seen from Kirby, sometimes his explanation, what happens during the game, doesn't exactly match up with other people's eyewitness account of what happened during the game. Fourth quarter defense comes to mind from Saturday as a for instance on this. So I like I said before, I mean, that explanation for me leaves a lot to be desired, but at the same time, I'm just sort of fine with them doing what they're going to do, and let's just see kind of where it goes, and let's see where it's going to kind of lead. But if you don't have receivers that can get open right now, if that's Kirby Smart's insinuation there, then you better well fix that before 2020 then, and find some way to do so.
I would add that for all this talk about Seth Williams and the success he had on slants, most of those came in the first three quarters of the game when Auburn scored a total of 0 points. I think it was a lot of empty calorie offense there. And, I don't know if a 7-yard slant pattern, how much easier that is necessarily going to make things for this offense, when the larger issue has been the lack of explosive passing plays in this offense. And slant plays are the exact opposite, more often than not, of an explosive passing play.
So I'm going to say one more point about this, and then whatever you say after that, I'm just going to agree with you because I'm ready for this conversation to be over. I think the point that you're making, though, kind of goes back to what I've said before of I don't need the Georgia offense to be way different. I just need for it to be a little bit different and a little bit of an easy pass play every now and then to go along with what I really like about the Georgia offense. I love big offensive line, really good running backs. I love the from play action that we get from time to time. I like a lot of that. I just need something to be a little easier to go along with that. And there have been plenty of games where I wouldn't have turned up my nose at a 7-yard completion, to be honest with you. And so, from that standpoint, something a little easier from time to time, I think would go a long way towards making Georgia better.
So you still think the Pac-12 is soft?
Oh, gosh. All right. Let me go back to Facebook here for a moment. Drew Miller says, no one has scored more than 20 on us all year. Proud of that defense. Keep that up. Is that really true? Has Georgia not allowed more than 20 all season long?
20. South Carolina hit 20, and they needed overtime to get there.
So this is why I've kind of become such a pacifist when it comes to the argument about the Georgia offense, is exactly what the commenter just mentioned. If you look at the recent college football playoff national champions, we got a 5-year track record. 5 years is not an insignificant amount of time. It's half a decade worth of college football data collectively added together. There's only been one team to win a national championship in the playoff era who finished in the top 10 of scoring. That was Clemson a year ago. I'm talking on offense. However, 3 of the last 4 national champions were either first or second in points allowed, which is Georgia currently number 2. So there is a little bit more of a correlation in recent years with really, really stingy defenses than there is with really, really prolific offenses. Now, the problem with building a team around defense is the margin for error is just so thin that you have to, once you score points, they're sort of there forever. And once you, give up points, they're kind of there on the scoreboard forever. So I think that you hyperinflate each individual moment of a game when you're trying to win them 21-20. I just think that it's just the nature of the business. That it's hard to lean on a great defense, especially as you start playing tougher and tougher offenses, which for the most part from December on, that's exactly what Georgia will do. But the commenter who mentioned this, was it Drew? I apologize. Mm-hmm. The commenter who mentioned this is exactly right. As long as Georgia is as stingy as it is, you better believe it's a national championship contender. I mean, Marcus Spears, I don't think is necessarily wrong when he said toughest team to play in the SEC. For as stressed out as Georgia will be about stopping Joe Burrow, you better believe that Joe Brady and Steve Ensminger, to the extent that he still has a job, you better believe that they are going to be just as stressed out about dealing with the Kirby Smart defense as Georgia will be about dealing with the LSU offense. It is just as tough a matchup, even for an offense that's as prolific as what LSU's is.
So I wrote this morning sort of about the still ramifications of the South Carolina loss, why it matters and why it doesn't, because as you well know now, any opposing fan base that sort of has looked at Georgia just wants to shout, point, and scream. Well, they lost to a South Carolina team that's going to go 4-8. And I think the committee has shown that does not matter. But what sort of does matter, and we saw this bear out last night, Georgia is not going to leapfrog Clemson. Even if it keeps winning and adding impressive wins. They're not going to leapfrog Ohio State, even if Georgia does find a way to beat number 1 LSU. Like, the reality is there is a certain ceiling on how high this Georgia team can climb on its own merits without another team dropping a game. And if you sort of spin this forward, and it seems to be that there is a clear, top 3 of LSU, Ohio State, Clemson. Those are, like, far and away, I think, the most elite teams in college football. And if Georgia is going to win a national championship, because of that South Carolina loss, they are very likely going to have to beat all 3 of those teams, likely in succession, to win a national championship. And I think that becomes very, very difficult. It's the point you were making a few weeks ago of, Georgia's only got a 20% chance of running the table when we were starting with before the Florida game. Not so much because they only have a 20% chance of winning that game. It's more just the additive, it becomes more and more difficult to string those sort of performances together. And so I think because of all that, that's sort of why you see this. That's why the South Carolina loss hurts the most, because, if they're undefeated in the SEC title game, I like to think that an unbeaten Georgia and an unbeaten LSU would just be playing for seeding at that point. But now Georgia's playing for its life in that game, and then they're going to have to find a way to likely beat Clemson, two of Clemson, Ohio State, or LSU.
I think that's a really good point. I've got a lot of good comments coming in. Let me do some of these in kind of rapid fire fashion. Cheyenne Taylor de la Garza says, okay, given the stinginess of the Georgia defense, does it hold Texas A&M under 20 points? That's one of the things I'm looking to see on Saturday against a little bit, what I think of as a little bit more potent offense, certainly a dangerous team from time to time. Can you still be stingy against a team like that, playing with its quarterback? A lot's been made this week of the fact that this is Georgia playing a healthy quarterback as opposed to backups and third strings that Georgia played for a while there in the month of October. Finding a way to be stingy in that game, Connor, I think is I think that would send a pretty good message of just how legit this Georgia defense truly is.
Is Kellen Mond the best quarterback Georgia has played to this point in the year?
It's certainly a fair answer for me. I'll take him over Trask. The Ian Book thing, I don't know that I could do a good side-by-side comparison on that necessarily just because I'm not looking at stats right now, but knee-jerk reaction is to say that he certainly presents more of a challenge than other quarterbacks have. And I think that Bo Nix is probably fine at this point in the season, but obviously Mond's better than he is. So, yeah, I think you can make a pretty strong case for that. Like I said, I'm going to plead ignorance on, what Ian Book has done for a full season, but I think that Mond's pretty tough. Lee Bridges says, BA, do you think that Cortez Hankton's doing a good enough job with our wide receivers, or is it time to look for other options to help teach them how to get open? So, Lee, this kind of goes back to what I said about the Tom Brady thing during the show today, where Brady says, it doesn't matter what I think, it just matters what we do. I don't really want to play the blame game right now with how much of the issue with Georgia not throwing the ball is a very stubborn Kirby Smart who doesn't want to cede control over to somebody else. How much of this is James Coley just kind of not really fitting the bill as a first-year offensive coordinator? How much of this is receivers just not really being able to get open? How much of this is Cortez Hankton not being able to coach up those receivers? The blame game for me right now is just not really all that interesting, because assuming things work out and Georgia wins this stretch of games that Connor just described, at that point in time, no one's going to really care who didn't do what during the regular season. Georgia will have figured it out. And I'm assuming, given some more data points still to come, including Texas A&M on Saturday, what is or isn't true, at some point in time, I think a lot more obvious, and it's going to be a lot more clear about what the real problem really was. And at that point in time, if things end badly for Georgia, hopefully someone will step up and kind of address that. But I will say, after all of that, the whole blame the players mantra has kind of always been a problem for me, just given the fact that we've got players here who've actually done this in other uniforms before. So this idea that, nobody can get open, Demetrius Robertson had 700-something yards receiving in a freshman year playing at Cal. A little bit different kind of defenses, I'll certainly grant you that, but it's not like we haven't seen him get
Softer
open.
League.
It's not like we haven't seen him get open in the college game there before. I mean, and Georgia essentially held him hostage for the last 2 years. So, I'm not ready to do the blame game on what's the cause for this, because I'm either hopeful that it ends up not being a conversation worth having, or the kind of conversation that maybe somehow this is obvious and some steps taken towards fixing that, whether it be aggressive in the final push towards the 2020 recruiting class or some sort of structural change to the leadership. But Connor, I just can't do the blame game on this right now. I just can't. I am all in on the Tom Brady mantra of, what do I think? It doesn't matter what I think. It just matters what we do.
If I could defend Hankton a little bit here, who had the big touchdown catch on Saturday?
It'd be Blaylock.
I think Hankton's done a really good job of getting him ready, and especially given that he came in over the summer and was not an early enrollee. Him and Pickens, and even Cager too, I think they have all contributed at least at or above where we thought they would do as first-year players, and I do think Hankton deserves credit for that. And, I think it's fair to assume as well that, Blaylock and Pickens are going to continue to get better. And, from a recruiting standpoint, Hankton was a huge part in landing George Pickens, a 5-star wide receiver that Georgia had not landed since 2009. They're bringing in Marcus Roseman next year, who is a borderline, similar Blaylock type, not in terms of the way they play, but in terms of where they are ranked.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's a Hankton thing. I just think it's sort of a confluence of events. I don't think we're having a lot of these conversations if Jeremiah Holloman is still on this team.
Maybe not.
If Luke Ford is still on this team, I don't think we're having a lot of these conversations. I think it's just a confluence of events. Tommy Bush getting hurt and being out for essentially the entire year. I just think there is a confluence of events that sort of made it for a perfect storm. Riley Ridley, who is not playing in the NFL right now, sort of leaving early last year, and you can say what you want. Maybe he's just not in the right situation. He is in a Bears offense that is terrible, but I think it's a confluence of events that sort of perfectly conspired against Georgia to sort of hurt the wide receiver play this year.
Holly Piegler says if we played like we did against the Gators in the first half, we will win it all. Holly, that sounds good to me.
Or the first three quarters against Auburn.
Yeah, it's true as well. Scott Fender
it sounds like you don't exactly agree with that there.
I'm just going to keep a good vibe going for now. Scott Fender says LSU's going to probably score 21 to 24 on us. We just need around 25 to 28 points to win this game. And Scott, I think that's actually a pretty good way to look at all of that, all things considered. And I guess as a preview of that, am I oversimplifying things to say, boy, if Georgia could be somewhere in the 30s on Saturday, playing better offense against what I think is a lesser defense than what it saw a week ago, and then still holding Texas A&M to something below 20, I don't even care about the Vegas point spread on this, but something 30s with A&M somewhere in the teens, I think that'd be a pretty fun statement by Georgia on Saturday if it'd be able to do that. Is that an oversimplification?
You doing cartwheels if it's 31-17?
I would definitely be very, very happy with that. That would be very. I'm happy to get a win by a single point, by a skinny point. I'll take it. But 31-17 would make me feel much better about the scenario that the commenter just described in terms of how Georgia could beat LSU.
Victory that would be very significant to some if that was the spread.
As they like to say. Let me do a couple more YouTubes. We're going to get ready to go.
If I could break in for a little bit here, I'm not sure you know how much you know about this, but right as our show began, Austin Kirksey, who was the former high school quarterback at Walton, high school teammates with Dominic Blaylock, was a 3-star quarterback, went to Nevada. He's now transferring to Georgia as a preferred walk-on and will be on the team next year.
Yeah, I had read a little bit about that. I guess Jeff Sintel's got some reporting on that at DawgNation.com. There had been a little bit of chatter about that over the last little bit. So good stuff from Jeff to kind of get that up there. I think that Georgia is going to throw a lot of bodies at a quarterback competition. And, right now, let's say that Jake Fromm came back for senior season, and let's say that just for the sake of conversation, let's just say that Stetson Bennett was the number 2 quarterback next year, that everything was kind of like as it is now. Let's say there was no Carson Beck in this. Georgia doesn't have its third-string quarterback situation quite as solidified as maybe it has in the past. Some teams like to have. So between, say, Priestley, the young man here from Walton, other guys like that, I think there's even a competition to be like that number 3 guy in the NFL, what you'd call the emergency quarterback, because one way or another, a healthy DeJuan Mathis is not going to be happy just being the third-string quarterback, and a healthy Carson Beck is not going to be happy just being the third-string quarterback. So, the idea of who your emergency guy is, I think there's going to be a competition ongoing for that at a place like Georgia, and we may be seeing a future situation where your number 3 guy is not necessarily a scholarship quarterback moving forward.
I'm trying to do the math here off the top of my head, but I believe there are only 4 teams in the SEC this year that to this point have had the same starting quarterback for every game. Auburn, who Georgia just played, A&M, who Georgia plays this week, and Georgia, obviously, and then LSU with Joe Burrow, who they will likely, in all likelihood, play in 2 weeks.
So to answer the question from the Green Soldier and others here on YouTube, no, BA would not be able to pull off a cartwheel. I for the most part, bend like a Ken doll. Like my arms bend up like this, my legs. I don't have a lot of flexibility one way or another. Now, I can be a little light on my feet from time to time, but in terms of being able to do a cartwheel, I would not be able to pull that off.
Do you think that I can pull off a cartwhol?
I think you certainly have a better chance of doing it than I do.
I, for a fact, can do a cartwheel.
Yeah, you certainly have a better chance of doing that than I can.
And to answer Scott Harris's question, no, Mathis has not been cleared yet.
Yeah.
The longer the uncertainty goes with him not being cleared, and obviously I'm rooting and wishing for him to get back on the field and fully cleared, the more I do wonder, just given he had brain surgery, I do wonder if there is ever a day DeJuan Mathis will be cleared to play at Georgia.
Boy, I hope that's not the case, but we'll be continue to pray for him. Somebody mentioned on YouTube, I've had a hard time today finding the comments I want to read, so I like to typically give name credit. I'm not going to be able to do that on this one. Somebody said, hey, in order to beat Clemson or Ohio State, Georgia's going to have to score at least 35 points. That very well might be the case against both those teams, which really kind of dovetails to something I've been seeing on some of our comment sections a lot here today. Ohio State doesn't play anybody. For me, there's a big reason why on yesterday's show I made the case for Georgia leapfrogging over Clemson based on its schedule, but I didn't do the same thing for Ohio State because while you may have some problems with the Ohio State schedule to date, you got to look at what's going to be coming the rest of the way for the Buckeyes here. It's Penn State on Saturday. It's at Michigan to close out the regular season, and it's either Minnesota or Wisconsin again in the Big Ten title game. I think at that point in time, if you're going to be fair, if Ohio State continues to do what it has been doing against those teams, it will have definitely added the kind of resume that I think makes it legitimately worthy of the attention for the positive that it's gotten here this year. And I know that's not popular with the audience, but honesty compels me to admit on that I view Ohio State and Clemson as two very different teams. Now, I think you can be an elite team and play a soft schedule. I think Clemson's an example of that. They are one of the top teams in the country benefiting from playing an easy schedule, and I don't think they should be rewarded for that. But Ohio State, up to this point in time, maybe has not played exactly a murderer's row, but that changes for me in a big way on Saturday when they start playing the Penn States, the Michigans on the road. True road games matter. And then a Big Ten title game that's going to come against a team that's also, for the most part, been pretty effective all season long. So the one thing I'm not going to do a ton of the rest of the way, assuming it keeps winning, is criticize Ohio State for its schedule because it's about to get a whole lot tougher.
Right. And they already have a win over a top 15 ranked Wisconsin team. They have a win over Cincinnati. Now, you might poo-poo at that, but that is Cincinnati's only loss for this year. And Cincinnati, as of right now, is slated to be the top group of 5 team that would play in the New Year's Six Bowl. I think if you really want to pick nits, all of Ohio State's quote-unquote tough games up until the Michigan game will have come at home, and that might, weigh into it, whereas Georgia, they won a neutral site game against Florida. They won on the road at Auburn. But, again, this stuff is going to even itself out. I do still think if, God forbid, LSU beats Georgia in the SEC championship game, LSU's probably going to be the number 1 overall seed, just given, Florida will be a top 10 team by that point again. Alabama will still very likely be a top 10 team, and Georgia, I think, will still be a top 10 team as well. And to have those 3 wins, I don't think Ohio State beating Minnesota, Penn State, and Michigan would sort of have the same sort of thing.
Gregory Nowak predicts Memphis is going to beat Cincinnati. They have a chance to play at least.
Certainly could.
They may play twice before the season's done here. There as part of the American Athletic Conference. Matthew McGahee also said about Ohio State, he thinks they're legit. Their schedule's statistically actually pretty good. I went through and broke them all down by stats. Yeah, Matthew, I've kind of seen the same thing. And I guess here's my point on this. As a Georgia fan, I am not scared of Georgia playing anyone, nor would I advise any other UGA fan of being scared of playing someone. However, if you told me I have a magic wand I could wave and Georgia would not have to play this team to win a national championship, the team that I would pick to wave that magic wand on is no doubt Ohio State. That's the team that they've actually recruited, statistically speaking, a little bit better than Georgia has. They've got dynamic playmakers on defense. Someone asked before, who's the team that's allowed fewer points this season than Georgia has? It is Ohio State. The offense obviously speaks for itself there as well. A couple huge weapons to have to deal with there. I think that Georgia on a neutral field could beat Ohio State. But if you told me I can pick one opponent to kind of send through a trap door to make winning a national championship easier, it's not LSU for me, and it's not Clemson for me. It's not Alabama for me. Ohio State's the one team I'd love to see Georgia avoid, if at all possible.
And if you think BA, don't want to criticize players, which is certainly a fair and just thing, and he's certainly not alone in that, or don't want to talk about wet balls and how hard it is to throw footballs in the rain, which we might find out again on Saturday. Yeah. You're going to see the Justin Fields thing is going to really get out of control, I think, from both a national perspective and even on a more local perspective. So I do say, just as someone who has to talk and write about this kind of thing, as well as that stuff would do page view wise, it is something very much we have to tiptoe around.
Yeah, no,
it's not fun for BA to want to relitigate this kind of stuff and hash it out and talk about it. Not just once or twice, but he's going to have to do this a lot in the potential lead up to that game. Whereas I think just about everybody would much rather prefer to focus on Clemson, focus on somehow an Oregon or a Utah, The more I think about it, I think it might actually be Utah that comes out of the Pac-12.
Yeah, I have a sneaking suspicion right now that Utah's the better of those
Yeah.
two teams. And like I said, we've got 2 road games for those guys on Saturday, so it ends up being a pretty good comparison. Let me do one more and we're getting ready to go here. Oklahoma won their last championship by pure great defense. I believe they won 9-7. This Texas A&M game may be a blessing in disguise. We need the competition. Yeah, I mean, I think there's an argument to be made for that, and I think that he's referencing the 2000 national championship game, which was not a very well-played game. I
think it was 13-2.
Yeah, not a very well-played game for sure. That was also a long time ago in kind of the early days of the BCS. And frankly, I think Florida State fans still blame Richt for that, for being focused on the Georgia job and not there to call that offense the way that he should have been. All right, let's go here today. Appreciate you being with us. By the way, huge thanks to our friends at the AJC for just keeping us informed about everything going on. You can get Atlanta news now at ajc.com. We have a debate here in Atlanta. President Obama is going to be in Atlanta here today there as well. And it's just a lot of politics stuff going on. So, make sure you know where Obama's going to be, because that's always a traffic deal anytime a former president is in the building. And also just the center of the political world. So we don't talk about politics here, but the AJC covers it like nobody else. Get your Atlanta news now at ajc.com. Also, huge thanks to R.S. Andrews, making the R.S. Andrews cool down possible. Air, heating, plumbing, electric. You can find all of that at rsandrews.com. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. It's all what they do to help deliver smiles, because story after story, that is what they've been doing. It's rsandrews.com. We're back tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. for DawgNation Daily, presented by Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort. Got a special guest to kind of look at the situation with the Texas A&M Aggies, learning a little bit more about not just the Aggies team, but kind of how they feel about being playing Georgia for the first time here in the SEC. So we'll do all of that tomorrow. But thanks for being with us today. It's DawgNation Daily, presented by Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort. Y'all have a good day, everybody.